I want to take the goal. That's exciting.
You were too.
Very good. Hot mic. Great. Good morning, everybody. Our schedule is another victim of Washington's prosperous economy. So I'm Roger Millar, I'm Secretary of Transportation. Welcome to the October 11th meeting of the I-405 Executive Advisory Group. Why don't we start by going around the table and introducing ourselves, who you are and who you're with. We'll start over here.
Senator Guy Palumbo, represent the First District.
And I have to give everyone a warning, do not turn your mics off, because once you turn them off, they're off forever. We have a little tech glitch here.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Mathis with Federal Highway Administration.
Rich Crispo, Mayor of Newcastle.
And Roach of 405 project.
Roger Miller, watch that.
Sound Transit. Emmett Heath, Community Transit.
Chris O'Clair, King County Metro.
Peter Heffern, King County Department of Transportation for Harold County.
Carol Thompson, Community Transit.
I'm David Berg, Assistant Director representing City Bill.
I'm Randy Corman, registered council member. I'm Ed Berry, WSDOT Toll Division. Ken Henry, the 45167 Program Administrator.
Carl Westby, 45167 Program.
Bruce Brown, PRR.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Senator, Representative, and I understand there's somebody here from Representative Springer's office as well. So let's talk a little bit about the agenda. We're going to hear a presentation from our team with updates on the express toll lanes and the projects in the 167-405 corridor. We're also here from our transit agency partners about their bus experience with the express toll lanes so far. There'll be plenty of time for discussion. Would remind anybody, if anybody wants to sign up for public comment, there is a place to sign up at the front desk, so please do so. We'll have plenty of time for that at the end, and there's also a sign-up sheet at the front table, so if you want to memorialize your visit with us, make sure you're on the list. Well, here we are with our third meeting in 2017. We started back in April. When I came on board as secretary, we decided we would have regular get-togethers to talk about progress and talk about issues. So we're planning one more meeting for this year, either in late December or, depending on everybody's schedule, perhaps early in January. We want to focus on what we know today about the toll lane performance as we are at the 2-year mark. The 2-year data is still being analyzed, digested, what have you. We've got the full data for the 21-month period, and we'll have a little bit on what's happening in the 2-year time frame. We'll also get to talk about next steps in the corridor, especially the work that the team's been doing at the north end of I-405, where we're still seeing some issues. I like to remind everybody, really 3 things. One, as was evidenced by the commute this morning, we have a prosperous economy, and that prosperous economy has transportation implications, which, talking with my colleagues around the country, I find a nice problem to have. I'd rather have the aisles full in the store that is Washington State as opposed to empty highways because nobody has jobs. So that's a positive thing. The other thing to remember is that the projects that we're going to talk about today didn't drop out of the sky. They are a part of really decades of planning and partnership in this I-405 corridor. Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, from the federal perspective, the state of Washington, Sound Transit, King County, Snohomish County, the transit agencies, all the cities along the corridor have been working on this for quite some time. There was a record of decision on an environmental document back in 2002. talking about roadways, talking about transportation choices, and talking about environmental enhancements and stewardship. And we're building that, so the stuff that we're talking about is in a context, and we'll talk more about that. Today, we're going to hear about how the I-405 Express toll lanes are operating from a number of different speakers. We have 4 members of the WSDOT team that are going to talk. Kim, who heads our I-405 SR-167 program, and we've elevated that program. You may have heard that we've reorganized somewhat, and we have elevated the I-405 corridor officially to mega project status, which I guess gives Kim the opportunity to buy new business cards. But one of the things we found is that when you look at the Alaska Way Viaduct project, the 520 corridor, the 405 corridor, and the Gateway, they all start to throw shade on one another in terms of transportation and land use implications and the like. So we've elevated the Gateway and 405 to mega project status, and we put them all under a program administrator for all of the mega projects. So you'll be hearing from Kim, our new mega project manager. He's going to talk about the recommendations for the 40-mile system, the overall schedules, and recent project highlights. Ed Berry, who manages our toll division, will give us an update on express toll lane performance. Bruce Brown, who's the Director of Research at Pacific PRR, will review the results of the surveys that we've done, including a recent survey of business users, businesses whose vehicles go up and down the I-405 corridor. And then Carl Westby, who's the traffic manager, will present an analysis of the express toll lanes, how they're working today on our I-405 compared to similar sections of I-5, and answer some questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim to start the technical presentation.
Thanks, Roger. I just wanted to go back and talk a little bit about what Roger was mentioning about the history here and how we got to where we are. After we adopted the master plan in the corridor, we really took care of some of the choke points with the nickel and the TPA program. We went back and took a look at what was the next thing that we needed to do, and we put together a traffic and revenue study on the corridor for the legislature in 2010. And after we completed that study, we brought in an expert review panel. We brought in experts to take a look at a number of different areas, including Texas Transportation Institute, to really take a look at the modeling after review. They found that the way we had approached things seemed to make a lot of sense and fit with the national best practices at the time. And so as a result of that, our committee then adopted and moved forward with a 40-mile plan. And that included then connecting the 167 hot lanes into the 405 express toll lanes and creating a 40-mile system. After we did that work, though, there were still a couple of things that weren't yet complete, and that had to do with the carpool policy. So we came back again with the committee and this group and did a lot of work in terms of what should the carpool policy be, and we were taking a look at that as it related to the whole corridor, but also what was the best approach to move forward with the piece that was not yet complete. And that was the section between Highway 167 and downtown Bellevue, so that became the Renton to Bellevue piece. And as at the completion of the work there, then once again, everybody endorsed the plan, and then the legislature went ahead and moved forward with it after they got that recommendation. So here we are today, and we are continuing with this next step of the program. And this is just a piece of the master plan. This is not the whole master plan, but it's the next phase after we address the choke points. And so we started with the Bellevue to Linwood as the first piece. We now have 2 years of operation, so we're going to be reviewing that today and going through the details of how that's working. We are also continuing our work in the very south end of the corridor, continuing extension of the hot lane system all the way down to the Pierce County line. We also are under construction right now today in the 405-167 interchange area, and then we'll be beginning soon with the Renton to Bellevue piece. We have some problems in the north end, and the legislature did improve some engineering dollars for us to get started with how to solve that particular problem. We're going to go through some of that in detail here today. I've gone through the schedule a number of times. I don't want to spend too much time on it here today, but the one thing I do want to point out is that it's the vertical yellow dash line there at the end of 2024, which is when Sound Transit plans to have bus rapid transit operating within the corridor. They're investing nearly $900 million in bus rapid transit, and so we have all of our projects scheduled to be complete ahead of that time for the most part, and we wanted to do that to make sure we had the infrastructure in the corridor so that they could operate the BRT effectively. I wanted to just quickly go through some of the things that are underway right now, and that's with the interchange work down at 45 and 167. There's been some really interesting things happening from an engineering perspective, maybe less so from other people's perspective. But as we've been doing that, we've relocated an existing noise wall, which is, I think, the first time somebody's done that. But it turned out to be a very successful effort, and it helps overall with schedule and budget on the program. So we think that's been a great innovation. We've really cut the hillside back so we can get the ramps in, moving forward with bridges in the area, and continuing with a lot of foundation work. If you've driven southbound on 167 lately, you've noticed that we also have new paving that goes all the way down to Kent area, and it's really improved the ride through there. So continuing to make progress. As we look at the north end and some of the challenges that we're facing here in the region, and as Roger mentioned, all the economy that's coming back, we're expecting over 1 million people in this area by 2040. But some of the most interesting things that I think has happened here is that just in the last 2 years, since the express toll lanes have opened, we've had almost 170,000 new residents move into the area, and just in King and Snohomish counties alone, we've had almost 150,000 new driver's licenses issued. So we are continuing to add pressure here within the entire region to our systems that are already experiencing a lot of congestion. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ed, who's going to talk about the performance of the express toll lanes over the last 2 years.
So thank you, Kim. So here we are in October. The 2-year anniversary's come and gone. This is I'm going to start with some real basics of the Bellevue to Linwood express toll lanes. So this is June data, as Roger mentioned. The majority of the data that we're going to talk about today, save for one in particular, is 21-month data. So this is 21-month data. Upwards of 25 million trips taken, 17.2 of which were tolled, 7.7 of which were pre-HOV exempt. It's a 15-mile system, a dual-lane section in the south end, a single-lane section in the north end, as most of us know. The hours of operation are 5 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday only. And we have HOV lane, occupant exemptions that are changing throughout the day. 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. is 3+, 9 a.m. to 3 is 2+, and 3 to 7 is back to 3+. So during the peaks, transit and van pools are always exempt. And so the graphic there shows you the dual lane and the single lane section. The purple line up there is the PQ shoulder that opened in April of this year that we're going to talk a little bit more about and how it has improved performance. A little bit more on how it works, the basics. That's a sign that you might see going northbound there for buy decisions that you might make going northbound. $2 to Kirkland, 124th, $2.50 to Bothell at 522, and then up to I-5 in Linwood, and then with the HOV designation there at the bottom. The express toll lanes are controlled by an algorithm that's updated every 5 minutes that controls congestion and manages congestion in the express toll lanes. As congestion rises, the algorithm raises the toll rates to disincentivize drivers from getting in, to help manage that speed, keeping that speed up as fast as we can, and keeping throughput going as high as we can. The minimum tolls are 75 cents. The maximum is $10. Again, 20-month data here, ending in June. The average toll during the peaks was just under $3, 2/3 were under 4, and the graphic there on the lower left shows you what the spread is for toll rates. So starting with performance then, excuse me, so this is volume throughput. It shows you how efficient the express toll lanes are out there, again, ending, this is 21-month data for, this is 2-year data for volume throughput. On the left you see southbound, on the right you see northbound, the lighter shade being pre-tolling and the darker shade being post-tolling. You see the volume increases that we get across the cross-section, up and down the corridor in both the single lane and the dual lane section, providing that volume benefit for vehicles getting through there during the peak hour when they really need it. Overall volumes anywhere between 4 and 20% have gotten through and translated into people throughput anywhere from 5 to 30% more people getting through because of the managed nature of the express toll lanes. Everybody gets a benefit as more volume is getting through during the peak. The speed performance. This is also 2-year data. This has been the topic of a lot of conversation of late that many of us are aware of. So this is one of the metrics in the legislation where we talk about maintaining speeds of 45 miles per hour 90% of the time. We've broken up the corridor into 4 sections there to depict how each of the sections are performing within the 2-year data. So you see the dual lane sections on the bottom, the single lane sections on the top, and then split northbound and southbound. You see 3 of the 4 sections are performing very well. We're upwards over 90% in 3 of the sections. The trouble section, the section where we're having the most difficulty, is the southbound single lane section. It's just so popular in the morning. It's being used to a degree that it really it affects the overall performance of the corridor, but it also results in higher toll rates as well because of the popularity of that express toll lane. Some of the other things I like to point out here is that prior to the express toll lanes opening, the HOV lane was only meeting this metric of 45 miles per hour 56% of the time. So quite a market improvement, up to 85%, which is the new 2-year metric that we're all talking about. So the 2-year data is 85%, over 45 miles per hour, 85% of the time. So we're seeing great performance in the 3 sections. We're still having struggle in the southbound direction. Kim will get into a little more about how we can work to make that better and solve that. The other metric that we're measured against in the legislation is revenue performance. Does the project generate enough revenue to cover operation and maintenance costs? It clearly does. This is 21-month data. As of end of June, $38.6 million generated, 13.6 of which was covering operations and maintenance, leaving $25 million for reinvestment in the corridor. 11.5 million was already reinvested in the PQ shoulder, so it demonstrates what the toll revenue can do and how it can be harnessed for a project that brought quick relief to drivers in the north end, so that's something that I like to emphasize as well. So that's the 2 metrics that we talked about at the 2-year anniversary. We're clearly generating enough revenue to cover operation and maintenance. We know there's conversation about the 45 mile per hour metric, and that's going on and will go on into the coming session. But we've been out talking to legislators and others to talk about how the project is performing and how it's performing very well, providing options for drivers out there. Another issue that many may not be aware of is there is an ongoing study of express tolling data. This is funded by the legislature and managed by the JTC. So the university has been out there since the springtime gathering data and analyzing the way our data is analyzed and how it's reported. So we're looking forward to that report out in the fall and winter. There is a report out at the JTC in December, and the final report due just after the first of the year. And then my last slide is having to do with public opinion. We've done a lot of surveys pre-opening and post-opening. We did a recent one in the summertime. I think that I spoke a little bit about the last EAG. And this one was focused on not only good-to-go customers, but 405 drivers that don't necessarily use the lanes. And the question in both of the surveys was, do you like having the option of a faster trip? And we had a good response at yes at 60%. Like the option, and we're also seeing support that's rebounding over time as the project's been out there a couple of years. People understand how it works. People start to see the value. And this is also reflective of what we've heard and seen from other agencies that have deployed such projects, is acceptance goes up over time as people start to understand it and get used to it and see the value. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce to talk more about some recent surveys.
Thank you, Ed. So following along with what Ed just mentioned, we wanted to see how this, how the express toll lanes and hot lanes were responded to by the business community, to see if they also had positive things or negative things to say about their performance and how it might benefit their own business. So this was an online survey of about 24,000 good-to-go customers who had a business account. We wanted to make sure that they traveled at least once in the last year, and we received over 1,000 responses from businesses. This was conducted in late August and early September. So the first thing we want to talk about here is the fact that they are obviously using these lanes. You have close to 50% either reporting that they always use these lanes or they mostly use these lanes. It's a pretty small percentage who never use the lanes. That's only 5% or so, around 6%. And then you have some, about a fifth, who say that they rarely use them. But obviously, these are lanes that these business community is using. And the majority say that they benefit from having this option, which follows along with what Ed was mentioning before about the fact that people see this option as beneficial to them. Sometimes it's interesting when you listen to people who have negative things to say about the express tolling or about tolling in general. Nonetheless, those very same people say to us in other surveys, but I still like having the option. So there's sometimes sort of a disconnect between what people are reporting in terms of having the option and whether they like tolling in general. But here we can see from the business community that clearly 60% say that they benefit from having that option. And just a couple of things in that blue box that I'll point out. The businesses that said that they were more likely to indicate that they benefited from having this option were smaller companies. 67% of those who said they used the Auburn to Renton section said that they benefited. 64% who said they used the Renton and between Renton and Bellevue said that they benefit. And then the Bellevue to Linwood segment, those that use that segment, 61% said that they benefit. And then those who use the toll lanes more days per month were people who were more likely to say that they benefited from the express toll lanes or the hot lanes. So, nearly 2/3 of the business respondents indicated that these lanes were helpful to them for their work purposes, and almost a quarter said that they were very helpful. The percentage that said they were unhelpful is just about a quarter, and not surprisingly, those who are more likely to find these lanes helpful use them more days per month. So you got this is a very positive story to the business community. They're using these lanes, they find them to benefit their business, they find them helpful for work purposes, and they support the use of the toll revenues for future improvements to reduce congestion. So you've got 4/5 here who are saying not only is this benefiting me now in terms of my work practices, but I like the fact that the tolls can be used for future improvements. So they're seeing the benefit of this in terms of reducing congestion. And then finally, in terms of extending this system to the full 40-mile corridor, again, we have a very strong story to tell here. You've got more than half are saying that they are supportive of that extension, with more than a quarter saying they're very supportive. And then in terms of those who are more supportive of this extension, again, in the blue box, you can see some of the breakouts there. 33% of those who use the Auburn to Renton section were very supportive. 405 between Renton and Bellevue, 32% very supportive, and 405 between Bellevue and Linwood, 28% very supportive. And again, those who use the toll lanes more times, days per month, were more likely to support this extension. So from the business community's perspective, this seems to be a very positive and useful tool for them in their everyday business activities. And I'm going to turn it over to Carl.
Yeah, why don't we take and I know we have a big block of time scheduled for questions at the end, but we're going to be talking about corridor improvements. We're also going to be talking about transit performance. And I think an opportunity for any clarifying questions or quick comments from members of the group. And as you can see, if you put your table tent up like this, I'll try to call on you. So, sir.
Yeah, it's a simple question, and I suspect it has to do with how it's summarized on the chart. But it's a little bit confusing because there is no hot lane from Renton to Bellevue currently. So I don't know if those are users of the HOV lane or if they're people that drive that segment and answer the question.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question because this question was a multiple response question. You could say you used all three of those segments.
Okay.
And so if you use the 405 between Renton and Bellevue because there is no toll lane there, nonetheless, you are saying that you are very supportive of this extension.
That's what I thought.
Thanks for clarifying.
Other questions before we move forward? Yes, sir. Good morning.
Thank you, Secretary. My question is really about slide 18. I don't know if we can go back to that.
Sure.
It's around the legislative intent. Authorizing legislation states that if lanes fail to meet both standards, they will be closed as soon as practical. Based on the way in which we design these lanes, the only way you can generate revenue is to have slow speeds in the GP lanes to force people into the hot lanes. Given the fact that those two items, if you are profitable and you have high speeds, are therefore mutually exclusive, how would we ever meet these two criteria? And how did you interpret this in that way? Because the statute and all the hearings that we had on this were very clear that we wanted to meet both, either we met both of these, or we would have this, these lanes would be shut down at the two periods. I'm interested in your comments on that. How would you meet both those standards and still continue to operate the lanes?
Representative, that's a great question, and I think Kim in his presentation later, when he talks about what's happening in the Renton to Bellevue section, is going to get into the performance of the general purpose lanes and the performance of the express toll lanes as they're performing and as we anticipate they'll perform. As far as the statute is concerned, again, what we're planning to do is bring this data back to the legislature. We'll have the information from the University of Minnesota and elsewhere. Regardless of how you interpret that piece of legislation, and different people are interpreting it different ways, at the end of the day, the legislature is going to have their say in what happens. And so what we're planning to do is, again, continue the conversation with the community and bring that conversation to the legislature for your consideration and decision-making going forward.
I know you've commented that you had an AG opinion on this. I would very much appreciate if you could send that to my office so I can look at that as well.
I will ask them to do that.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments, observations before we go forward?
Yeah, in respect to slide number 17, where we have the revenues and operational costs broken out, I know that the contract is split in two, and part of it is out to bid currently, or the last time I explained. That operations cost of $13.6 million, is that expected to go down as we move forward?
That's a good question, Ed, and if you could also talk about, of that 13.6, how much goes to the contractor and how much of it is, for actual maintenance of the equipment and facilities?
Sure. So it could go down as other facilities come on board. The cost to fund the board tunnel under Seattle comes on board, that'll take a share, and as the Gateway project in the future, perhaps if that's told, that'll take a share. So the hope is that would absorb more of that cost. And the actual percentage of this cost that would go towards our vendor is actually quite low. It's only like 7.8%, I think, or under 8%. So in this metric, in this dollar, that's around $3 million. So it's a much smaller portion than what others might have said or might have heard. So so that's and then there's other costs associated within that 13.6 as well, and that's for WSDOT oversight, for state patrol, and for things like postage and credit card fees and that kind of stuff. So yes, the hope is that could be reduced as efficiencies are gained and as more toll facilities come online.
Another thing that I hear quite often from friends and foes alike is the concern that this money is going out of state to somebody down in Richardson, Texas. And that is where they're headquartered, but most of the employees of that company that are working on this project and most of the paychecks are here in Washington State. But the tolling vendor that was selected, not for this specific project, but for the tolling program in general, happened to be from Richardson, Texas, and we're in negotiations with a new vendor to take the back office on, and then we're also competing for the customer service contract. So we'll have new people on board here in the near future.
That's correct, and I should also say that, as Roger mentioned, the existing toll vendor does employ upwards of 100 people in the Seattle area that take our phone calls and run the customer service center.
Other questions, or Kim, you want to move forward with your part of the presentation, or whoever's next? Carl. Carl's next, I'm sorry.
All right, so going to jump ahead here a little bit. So we've heard a lot of questions. Why expressible lanes? Can instead we just go back to the general purpose lane and an HOV lane? What other options do we have? I'm going to talk about this kind of from a traffic perspective and what does that performance picture look like? So to start that discussion, we need to understand kind of where we're at. Kim and Roger talked a little bit about that master plan vision along the corridor. And what you can see here is that master plan had its horizon year at 2020. We're in 2017, that's only a few years away. That dotted line shows the daily traffic projections for year 2020 along the corridor. Green line up above it is where we're at today. And a lot of the corridor, we have not added capacity. So we're at about 20% higher demand in the corridor than what was projected when we developed our master plan back then. So a lot of demand in the corridor. Do we want to?
Yeah, Senator, clarifying question.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, so I mean, is the PSRC changing their projections given that we blew it out already by 2020? So that we can get different infrastructure investments, or is there any action that's happening as a result of the fact that on the ground is far ahead of what we planned?
Yes, and PSRC periodically goes through and develops their latest forecasts, but this is just comparing from then to what we were projecting to see here in a few years. We've already exceeded it by quite a bit. And then you heard a little bit earlier that we've got about 1 million new people showing up at Puget Sound. So the line is only going to go one direction. So fundamentally, if we have all this demand and it's clearly in excess of the capacity we have, what do we do and what options do we have? And if we're going to invest in additional capacity, how do we do that? What's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck? I'm going to walk through, there's a lot on this slide, so I'm going to walk you through it in pieces here. Took a look at I-5, this up in the North Seattle area. We've got 5 lanes up there. And I'm going to compare this to the 5 lanes that we have on 405 in Kirkland. So, same 5 lanes. On I-5, we have an HOV lane and 4 general purpose lanes. they're all performing fairly slowly. We have a lot of traffic congestion there. If you look over on the right, you can see during the peak hour how many vehicles are getting through that area in the general purpose lanes, a little over 5,000, 1,000 and change getting through in that HOV lane. So heavily congested, kind of limited throughput in this part of I-5. Let's look at another spot on I-5 a little further north. We see a very similar situation. Again, 5 lanes. HOV lanes moving a little bit better here, but it's still congested. Total volume throughput is still at about 6,000 vehicles in an hour. What happens if we compare that to a section on 405 where we have the express toll lanes? Same 5 lanes, we're just operating them differently. Same daily traffic demand levels, and actually these on 405 are a little bit higher demand. What do we see? General purpose lanes are actually flowing a little bit better. The express toll lanes, as compared to that HOV lane, are performing a lot better. And then when we're looking at total throughput, remember we're down here around 6,000 combined, we're approaching 9,000 vehicles. So same lanes, same daily traffic volume, performing a lot better. Another spot in Kirkland, this time looking northbound. General purpose lanes aren't free flow, they still have some congestion, but the express toll lanes are performing at a high level, and again, we're about 9,000 vehicles getting through this system. So when we look at those same 5 lanes operated in just a different manner, we get a drastically different performance solution, or performance result. So let's put them side by side, and this is just taking those gray bars and the green and purple, putting them side by side. Then we also went out and said, well, let's try and convert those to persons. So we have some occupancy information. It's really hard to look inside windows and count bodies as they're driving by. But we've got some methods for doing that. We can make some estimates and convert those vehicles to people. And when you put them side by side, you can see that we've got a pretty dramatic increase with the same 5 lanes, moving vehicles as well as people. Just one footnote here, we didn't include any transit in this. If you added transit vehicles if you added transit persons to that calculation, the numbers are going to go up higher. This is just a very simplistic exercise of putting them side by side. So, same 5 lanes, drastically different performance and results. So let's talk about why. You may have seen this, but you can see it again. And it's really fundamental to the whole express lanes concept. So we've got a graph here. On the vertical axis there, you can see speed. And along the bottom, you can see number of vehicles in a lane per hour. This is what you see on every freeway, every highway, pretty much everywhere in the United States, the same type of interaction. I'm going to walk you through it. When we start up here where we have low volumes, we have very high speeds. You're driving down the road, there's not too many people around you, you do the speed limit or in excess of the speed limit. High speeds, but not a whole lot of vehicles getting moved. As traffic demand increases, right, so we're starting to go this way, a little bit of drop off on speed. As the road gets a little bit more crowded, right, we have more vehicles on there. Something happens right around 45 miles an hour. As the volumes increase, you reach this tipping point where more and more demand hits the freeway, speeds drop, and then speeds continue to drop, and the number of vehicles you're serving, you actually go backwards, right? So you went from serving more and more and more vehicles to a breakover point where speeds are lower and I'm moving fewer and fewer vehicles. And that line continues all the way through. The 405 express toll lanes on the purple from that previous chart, they're operating right in this area here. And when we manage those 2 lanes, we can get them to perform and live at that spot. High speeds, high volumes, Those general purpose lanes, they're down here. So why were those bars a lot shorter? Just congestion, just struggling to move and process vehicles. So that's just basic traffic flow theory. And it's a little bit more than just a theory, because if we take actual data samples, we see that speed flow curve on 405, you see it on I-5, you see it everywhere, where we just go from high-speed, low-volume conditions to high-speed, high-volume conditions. If you don't manage it, you go backwards and things fall apart. That's why we do ramp meters, just as an example, right? We're trying to manage and meter that flow so we're operating in this efficient area here. So that's why managing these lanes is an efficient way to move forward. So let's talk a little bit about one express toll lane, two express toll lanes, single HOV lane, and how those compare. So this is on 405, around 85th Street, northbound before we put in the express toll lanes. So you can see that speed flow curve. It kind of caps out at about 1,400 vehicles per hour in that lane, and then it starts to break down. There's a couple things happening there. One, demand exceeds capacity, and we know what happens with that. The other piece is that we have friction with if you're driving in an HOV lane and you have stops general purpose traffic next to you, someone could be darting in and out, and so there's just a limit as to how many cars and how fast you can go there. So there's a couple things affecting that, but this is real life before condition of that HOV lane in Kirkland. Blue is the real life after condition where we put in the two express toll lanes. What do we see? We talked about volume. We're getting 300 to 700 more vehicles per lane with these express toll lanes than we had in the HOV lane. Speeds are 20 to 30 miles an hour faster than that. So we're able to manage and operate these two express toll lanes right in this area. So if you're going to make an investment, this is a good way to have a high-performing system. We're going to jump around a little bit here and talk about options. So these are our heat maps of the corridor. Walk you through them real quick. I-5 up in Linwood, downtown Bellevue, down here at the bottom. This is all for the morning commute. The left side of these images is 5 a.m. and then all the way over to 10 a.m. And then you can see the level of congestion. General purpose lane, we've got a lot of congestion up in the Bothell area today. The express toll lane has a fair amount of congestion up in the Bothell area today as well. If you look further down the corridor, still have some congestion in the Kirkland area, the general purpose lanes, but it's moving quite well in the express toll lanes in Kirkland. That's today's condition, the two on the left. What happens if we say, you know, let's not do the express toll lanes. Let's go and just go back to a 2+ HOV lane. Let's convert that second lane through the Kirkland area into a general purpose lane and see what happens. So, done the modeling. This is all part of that modeling that was reviewed with the Texas Transportation Institute and whatnot. And what do we see? We see immediately those general purpose lanes that were struggling up in the Bothell area are much worse. This is day one. This is as soon as you make that change. They are much worse. They struggle. The spillback goes up to I-5. We have about 700 vehicles an hour for several hours. They don't even make it to 405. They're stuck on I-5 in Snohomish County. We also have a bunch of traffic that is not dissipated by 11 o'clock. So we've got traffic spilling over in time that in some areas it's still not cleared by 11. That's the consequence in that area of making this conversion. What about the HOV lane up there? Well, more congestion in that lane. We've got the friction with the stops general purpose lanes. We don't have a buffer. So we see some very slow performance and even a little bit spillback of that HOV lane up to the north. We definitely have a bigger bottleneck at the 522 interchange. That's been an Achilles heel. Kim's going to talk about that in a little bit, but that area really struggles, and it gets worse if you make this conversion. You're down in the Kirkland area, in the general purpose lanes, things got a little bit better. That's a little bit of an artificial view because they got better because everyone's stuck in Snohomish County and couldn't make it down into Kirkland. So if you're getting on in Kirkland and driving and getting off in Kirkland, it's very nice. But all of these vehicles stuck up here, builds this huge bottleneck and meter, and that actually makes the Kirkland area a little bit better. Still has some congestion. The HOV lane has the same effect. That big, huge bottleneck lets only so many people through that interchange, and then things are flowing pretty well, a little bit of slowdowns in Kirkland. So that's what happens if we do a 2+ HOV lane, convert the general purpose lane, or the express toll lane back to a general purpose. Let's look at the next slide here, and what happens if we convert to a single express toll lane and say, well, we like express toll lanes, but we just like one of them. On the left, that's today's condition. Again, on the right, this is the change condition. General purpose lanes, similar, but actually a little bit worse, and we get a little bit of spillback that has not been typically occurring back onto I-5, 600 vehicles an hour in that peak. Why is that? In this area, around the 522 interchange, coming up the hill where our second express toll lane starts, everything going on there, that section performs worse when we switch to general purpose lanes. In today's condition, we have a high performing set of express toll lanes. They're just pumping a lot of cars through. They're performing very well. The general purpose lanes can't perform at that level in that area. So it's got a little more congestion, and that spillback is worse. What about the express toll lane? Well, up in Bothell, it actually gets a little bit worse also. So you're asking yourself, seems like we have a 3+ express toll lane up there, and this is a 3+ express toll lane, so why did it get worse? What we see today is there's some users of the express toll lane that will drive, we'll go here on the left, drive down the corridor and stay in the general purpose lanes because they don't like the $10 tolls. Get to the 2-lane section and dive in. When you have a single express toll lane, either you're going to use it and drive in it the entire way, or you're not. There's no advantage of getting it out in the general purpose lanes and getting in later. With a single express toll lane, these $10 tolls and these high tolls that we have in the north end, we have them for the entire corridor. Everybody gets high toll rates in this scenario. There's just not enough room to process enough vehicles through there, and we have to have high toll rates to try and manage the system the best we can. So that's what's happening up the north end, more congestion in express toll lanes, more congestion in the general purpose lanes, similar congestion in Kirkland, and the green that we have today and high performance in our 2-lane section now degrades, and we have breakdown in our single express toll lane. Why do we have breakdown? There's just too many people trying to use it, and there's only one lane of capacity, so it's just overburdened, similar to the condition that we have up there today. So, from a traffic perspective, consequences of doing something different, let's just go back to a 2+ HOV lane and convert that to a general purpose lane, has some pretty big impacts, especially if you're up in the north end. Similarly, if we go to a single express toll lane, I didn't specifically talk about it, but there's a transit reliability piece here for sure. Anytime you see that single lane or double lane section not performing, that's where transit lives a lot of the time. They are not getting the high-speed reliable trip. You know, they've got $800 or $900 million of BRT in the corridor, we don't have a high functioning system, we don't have express toll lanes, kind of takes the express out of that whole bus rapid transit system. And then, of course, there's the revenue piece. We know that if you unplug it and you don't have the express toll lanes, that revenue source goes away, and there's not that revenue for additional improvements. I just wanted to touch real quick. There was a question earlier about do you have counter requirements? Do you have a requirement that says you need to make money and you need to perform and you can't do both? I guess as I'm looking at all the data and looking at it, 3 of the 4 sections are absolutely meeting that dual requirement. We have 1 section that isn't. So I don't think that it's an impossible task that's been set up. I think we have 1 piece that is having a performance issue. So that's the traffic stuff.
We might take a break in the traffic stuff. I know Representative Harmsworth has a question, and others around the table may, before we get into the improvements we were talking about in the Random Bellevue section and the north end. So,
thank you, Secretary. My question was clarifying on the response that was given to Senator Colombo earlier about the PSRC traffic goals on slide 29. I don't know who won that slide. Has PSRC assumed a higher level of transit use, which is why their projection numbers go below now so much?
They, compared to those projections were back from our master plan, right? They are projecting a higher transit use in the region now than they were then.
Do you know what that percentage is?
I don't off the top of my head now, and it varies by corridor and facility. But
we can get that to you, but again, that 2020 projection was a projection that was made in 1995, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Am I next?
Yes.
Okay. Back on slide 29, if you go back there. So I appreciate the presentation of the data. It's very interesting as an engineer by profession as well, so I find it fascinating to see the data. I did want to point out that there's a bullet here when we say why build express toll lanes. I think a lot of the troubles that we have with public perception kind of starts with, I think bullet 2 is kind of an engineering statement, but it's not the real reason that we're doing the express toll lanes. And we're building the express toll lanes to get more traffic down the limited roadway. And when we say we're using it to help manage demand, that tells people we're trying to get them off the road, or we're trying to just make it so only people that can afford it can use it. But I think all your data shows and everything you said says that this is about getting more cars down that limited roadway space. And so I just wanted to suggest that please take a good look at that bullet so that it doesn't get out there and people circulate this. And just what we told you, they're trying to keep people from driving by putting expensive tolls.
That's a good point, and I think what I asked the team to look at is people, because I think what we're all interested in is how many people are moving up and down the corridor.
I think the whole presentation spoke to my heart about what we're trying to do, and I just thought it was that bullet is quite consistent.
Great, thank you. Senator?
Thank you very much, Secretary. I have to leave. I apologize for everybody. I just wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts, just if it's at all helpful. The funding question that we're kind of talking about here, that we're circling around as it relates to the projects, and especially the things that obviously we care about on the north end here on page 45. As we had a preliminary discussion with some of you last week, the plan that we have here that is hamstrung by just looking at the toll revenue without a gas tax or something else that we're doing at the state level is what you can do, and I appreciate that with the money that you have in front of you. My perspective and the perspective of folks that I'm dealing with down there is that it's inadequate. So the timeline, and that's not to in any way diss your plan or Kim's plan, is what you can do with what you have, but it's not enough. And there's a bigger question here, whether it's tolling or anything else, is that we have to fund these projects because we can't wait until 3037 to fix these projects with just the one nerd change right out here, to say nothing of the lanes north of 527 up to 5 and direct access ramps. The transit center that's not included here, Canyon Park Park and Ride, something that can actually integrate Peter's BRT. I'm very concerned that BRT is not going to function the way it needs to right now because we don't have the right plan on the north end to make it work. And all of that takes money. And unfortunately, we're running into a really bad tax season, so to speak, this year because folks are getting hit with their MVET, with their property tax for Sound Transit. They're getting hit with the biggest property tax increase in the history of the state, 82 cents with common schools levy, and local levies from Cleary not going down until the next year. So it's an extremely challenging tax environment. And we're also trying to pass a carbon tax, which theoretically would raise the price of gas about 10 cents, which is going to make a gas tax, even a nickel package, even that much harder. So I just wanted to leave you with that we're trying to grapple with that right now as you head into 2018, because I think everybody acknowledges that we can't wait, another 10 years for another investment in infrastructure. So there's already discussions beginning on a small package, a small gas tax package. But it's going to take years as the other one did. And we have those complicating factors that I mentioned. So I just wanted to leave you with that I think, while I appreciate the work that's going in right now, what we have in place here on this deck on the north end is inadequate, both in terms of the investments as well as the timeline. But I'm committed to working with everybody in this room to figure out how the heck we do fund it. But that's really the problem right now, is funding.
Great. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Other questions before we move on to the improvements? Seeing none, we'll turn it back over to Kim.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the projects that we're still working on here, and I wanted to start with the Rent to Bellevue piece. And so Carl just went through how to read these maps, and that works great, except we're going the opposite direction this time. And so if we look over on the left-hand side, we're starting at I-5 down in Tukwila, and then we are going north through 167, 169 up through I-90 and to downtown Bellevue at the top end there. And what we're taking a look at with these are what's the difference between not building a project right now, so not making any improvements. So it's really taking today's conditions that we have out there and then adding some more traffic volume. And then what is it going to look like when we do open the express toll lanes through that particular section. So if we look at the HOV lanes on the left, you can see that we have a lot of congestion that goes up through about the 44th interchange. That's where the Seahawks VMAC facility is, and that's really where the end of the bottleneck is. Same thing is true with the general purpose lanes. Both cases, that's really the end of the bottleneck. Then we hit a little bit of free flow conditions up through about I-90, and then we hit congestion as we're going into downtown Bellevue. Then on the right-hand side, the two over there, we have the express toll lanes and general purpose with then the new improvements in place, and we've really been able to address most all of the problem areas. Still a few little points here and there, particularly with the general purpose lanes, and then later in the morning with the express toll lanes as people are trying to get out and get to other points such as to 520 and some of those areas. But for the most part, really have solved that particular problem here for the short term. And of course, this is not going to last. This is what it's going to look like when it opens. We're going to continue to see that pressure and growth, but I think it's a pretty good starting point. This also doesn't replace the master plan. This is a phase of the master plan, so there's still more improvements scheduled within this area. The legislation says that all toll revenue that's generated within a corridor stays within that corridor and to be reinvested back in the corridor. And so everything that comes back, we are planning to reinvest in the corridor. And the legislature did approve engineering funds to get started on the section to between 522 and I-5 and take a look at what we can do up there.
So I'm going to ask you to put it into overdrive.
Yep, I'll go fast. So we've updated our revenue forecast, and we have nearly $500 million that'll be available in the first 5 years after Rent to Bellevue. That leaves us adequate funding to complete the Rent to Bellevue project, but also some additional funds then to tackle the section between 522 and, there we go, and Highway 527, which is really the most high priority section, as we saw earlier. And getting that capacity will really help relieve, but the problems, and we had great success with the PQ shoulder lane. And so what we wanted to do was get some relief in the southbound direction. So we took a project between 522 and 527 and broke it into 2 phases, with the first piece being southbound capacity through the 522 interchange. And then with that, we can complete the rest of the project later. Down at the bottom, we have a schedule there that says we had toll revenue and some other funding source, such as Senator Palumbo was just talking about. Our critical path, we could have it done by 2025. If we had no other opportunities except just the toll revenue that's available, we could get started with that project 1A, which is southbound, by 2024. Still takes a couple years before we get back and complete the rest of the project. I just wanted to give a couple of visuals here on what that project looks like. This is the 522 interchange. We've got the big challenge is all those flyover ramps with the columns on either side of the freeway, creating a real difficult place for us to do any widening. What we are doing is building a new northbound structure just to the east of the 2 existing bridges there. That allows us to use then that middle bridge for the southbound direction and get that additional capacity through the area. This is that first phase of work. And then the next phase of work is to complete the direct accesses and the rest of the project here. So that is the project as a whole. And at that point, I think I can wrap it up.
That was quick. Thank you. Representative, quick question, and we'll hear from the transit agency.
Quick, thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Just on the last diagram you showed us there, for folks coming out of Bothell, we're adding in 3 intersections there. Have you done any analysis on the impact of the traffic on 522 and then the backups that may occur as cars are leaving 4 or 5?
Yes, we have. We've actually put a fair amount of time into traffic modeling of that, and we made sure that we had adequate turn lanes to really minimize it. We're actually going to get a fairly high level of service through these intersections for quite some period of time.
I understand the team's been working with public works staff and others from the cities.
Yes.
That are,
Yeah. Follow up. Yeah. Talk about the web. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you guys. I wanted to make sure, from my personal perspective and also the perspective of everybody who got involved in this partnership to begin with, the performance of the corridor for public transportation is of huge importance to us. Obviously, the master plan is a long ways from being built out, but even with the first parts of it going into place, we're seeing some changes, some higher volumes and some higher speeds, as were indicated in 3 of the 4 sections in the first phase of the project. And what we wanted to do is hear from our regional transit agencies about how the express toll lanes are affecting their performance in the corridor. And so we have Chris O'Clair from the Assistant General Manager, King County Metro, and Emmett Heath, the CEO of Community Transit, and Peter Rogoff, the CEO of Sound Transit, here to give us their perspective. So I don't know who's going to start, but we'll hear that.
Sure, I can speak. Can you all hear me? Do you want me to use this? Okay, great. Good morning. I think it's still morning. Thank you for inviting us. And thank you, Secretary, for the focus on mobility and the movement of people. We are excited as transit agencies to be part of this conversation. I always like to start off by stating we have the fastest transit ridership growth in the country right now. There's a lot of articles being written about it. Several of us were just at the American Public Transportation Association meeting in Atlanta last week, and we are the envy of many of our partners around the country and around the world. And I really want to stress that that happens because of the investments that we're committing to this region, as we see with ST3, that Emmett and I are now able to grow our systems after a terrible recession. But it's also because of the investments we're making with our partner agencies. It's really important that transit, what our customers are asking for is fast, reliable service, and we can only be fast and reliable if we get the right-of-way use that we need in order to move as quickly as possible through the system. So thank you for the invite today. I'm going to just quickly talk about who we are, King County Metro. Remember, I'm today going to present on a couple of slides on how we're operating the I-405 corridor and then compare it to how we're operating the I-5 corridor. We are more than just a bus agency. We are a mobility agency. We have actually more vans on the streets than we do buses. So the importance of van pools is really important. As we look at the system as a whole, I don't have data on that today. And I just also want to remind people that we have a large access paratransit program, so moving people with disabilities is also an important priority. Up here on the slide, you'll see what we were able to do is pull data from 2015 to 2017 and really understand, this is in the 405 corridor from Bellevue to Linwood, and really understand the travel time difference. And we can see that on average, it's about a 6 to 10 minute travel time savings that we've seen in the corridor with the use of the express toll lanes. This is just only representing 3 services that we provide. We operate about 7 routes in the corridor. Not all routes can use the express toll lanes. We are only a small, King County Metro is only a small portion of those routes. Our partner agencies operate a lot more service in the I-5 corridor. I think it's important that we compare that to what we're seeing on the I-5 corridor, as has been done in earlier slides today. And the top 2 routes, this is only a sampling of the routes that operate on the I-5 corridor. The top 2 routes represent I-5 South, and the bottom 2 routes represent the I-5 North corridor. And what we can see is that in a similar time frame from 2015 to 2017, that we are seeing a slowing of our service in using the HOV lanes. We are seeing in about a 2 to 3 minute decrease in that north end section up there. I do want to point out that in one of our routes, the 159, we thought it was important we shared this data with you. We've actually changed our schedules a little bit and altered our travel times in order to maximize the flow through the system. There's actually only, I think, 4 trips that is represented by that negative 5% on the Route 159. So it does vary a little bit, but in general, what we are seeing in the I-5 corridor and the use of the HOV lanes is a slowing of our system, and in a system that is already at capacity.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Emmett Heath. I serve as the Chief Executive Officer at Community Transit. And what we have to say very much the same as what you've just heard from King County Metro. Our experience in this corridor since the ETLs has been faster and more reliable trips for our customers. I did want to talk a little bit about our customers in that corridor. The customers are the important part of our message. Likewise, we operate dial-a-ride transit service or paratransit service for our customers with disabilities or other circumstances that make them unable to use our fixed route services. And the reason I mention that is because that is a pre-scheduled curb-to-curb service that has a very high premium on reliability. And reliability improvements is one of the things we've experienced in the 405 corridor with ETLs. In addition to DART service, like Chris, we operate one of the largest van pool systems in the United States. About 40% of all of our vans, 165 of them or so, operate in this corridor. Those are mostly commuters from Snohomish County heading south to Bellevue and other jobs. In addition to fixed route and our DART and van pool, we do operate some fixed route service in the corridor, and it's important service, but our footprint there, like King County Metro, it's relatively modest. In addition to operating our own fixed route service in this corridor, we do provide service under contract to Sound Transit, the regional express bus service in this corridor. And so if you take together all of the various clienteles and modes of service that we operate in the corridor, we're providing about 7,000 rides a day. And they are faster and more reliable than they were pre-ETL. So that's today. And I wanted to contrast the 405 corridor with the I-5 corridor. The illustration I'll give you is that 3 years ago, we added $2.6 million worth of service, commute service, in the I-5 corridor from Snohomish County to UW and Seattle. And that the additional investment in that corridor did not provide any additional trips, it did not provide any additional frequency, it did not increase the span of hours that we operate in that corridor. It was entirely to offset the adverse effects of congestion in the I-5 corridor. During that same period in the 405 corridor, we have not had to make any additional investment in service hours, and our speed and reliability has improved, and we attribute that to the ETL lanes in the corridor. So in terms of our customers and what it takes to attract people to public transit, speed and reliability, we've experienced significant improvements from the ETLs, but that is today. And so as I hand the mic over to Mr. Rogoff, I just want to say how excited we are to see this kind of transportation system management improvement that's building for the future when we anticipate ST3 providing that BRT service in the 405 corridor, and that's Peter's job.
Feedback. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us. I don't want to be repetitive with what my transit partners have said, but I think I would just echo what they said regarding bus reliability and what the express toll lanes have meant. Overall, and this is frankly a much bigger issue as it relates to the need to deploy rail in the region, a decision that the voters of the region have made and will be taxing themselves for many, many years to enable us to build out. Bus performance on our system has deteriorated on average about 6%. And with the population growth and congestion that is expected, we expect it to get worse. By contrast, our performance, even with worsening congestion and deterioration across the system, the routes that we are running on the express toll lanes actually have improved their performance by 1%, with ridership growth of roughly 4%. Does it mean something for the transit passengers, and does it mean something for growing transit passengers? Absolutely. Now, I didn't bring my own slides, but I'm going to quickly ask if we can go back to a couple of the others, because I think, it's not for me as being still relatively new to the region to give a history lesson, but I think it's kind of important in terms of the role of sound transit and regional transit in the entire system. Can we go back to slide 30 of your original presentation, if that's easy? Almost. Two more. One more. Okay, now, I don't know if it's going to start up again, but is there a way to get that video to move? If there is, great. If not, no worries.
Go back one slide.
Go, and then go up forward. Okay, so there we go. Our agency is charged by law by providing high-capacity transit. And do you see that sound transit bus there moving on the left? That is not it. And that is our regular condition. Importantly, we are, interestingly, nationally, when you look at the National Transit Database, Sound Transit is the #1 commuter bus operator in the United States as far as volume, which is commuter bus being defined not as the kind of city street buses or some of the more localized services that our partners provide, but basically connecting suburb to center city and suburb to suburb. And we are charged by law and was established to provide high capacity transit. And we were, in that thinking, the idea is that we should not be competing with each other and providing identical service. We should be trying to meet the broader needs of the region. And I will say, it's been a great partnership, and I think we've come a long way in just the last few years in seeing to it that we are augmenting each other's service, seeing what the need is, seeing who's best provided, seeing who's funded to provide it, and just provide it in a growing environment. The partnership is great, and it's getting even better. But we are charged by law by providing high capacity transit, and I think when we went into the ST3 development process and discussed the needs of what we call our east sub area, the east side, we heard loud and clear. There was great unanimity among the mayors on the east side that we needed to get out of thinking about just how we connect the east side to Seattle and start talking about how we connect communities within the east, between the east side. And that's where the whole I-405 BRT vision came about. and we had the benefit of the projects that were funded in Connecting Washington to actually provide the possibility of lanes that are going to move faster than that one in the 405 corridor to create a high-capacity transit connection between those cities. And also a high-capacity transit connection that would then be able to connect us to our light rail connections, obviously, that we're building out to Bellevue, and then to our spine to the north and south as we expand to the north and south. Well, so the question arises, if we do away with the potential to have high-capacity transit in 405, is Sound Transit even authorized to build a BRT project? I'm not authorized to just throw more express bus service on the street. I am charged by law with providing high-capacity transit that will move. And I think that needs to be a serious consideration as to any revisiting of the managed lane regime on 405, because we would have to have a very rich conversation among our board members on whether we would, let's talk, we're not talking small amounts of money. We're talking north of $800 million, in which a lot of communities, I'm looking at Mayor Whalen, there were very strong concerns about where the BRT stops were going to be, how we were going to connect to them. Same is true for other cities all along the corridor, down to Renton, even, we were extending it out to Burien and other communities. And we are working to make this happen by 2024. But if the traffic's not going to move, we will not be, there will be no rapid in bus rapid transit. There will be no high in high capacity transit, and we would have to completely rethink the investment, as a board. So I hope to be able to communicate that to those that want to revisit the regime at this point, because frankly, our whole plans for the I-405 BRT are premised on the facts that the lane has got to move. That's all. Thank you.
Well, my thanks to our partners in the transit community. What we'd like to do now, we're a little behind schedule because we started late, and I want to make sure we allow some time for public comment at the end. But there was, I think, some Q&A and some comment during the presentations. But I'd like to.
And first off, being a New York Italian, that's a lot of restraint on my part, not having said anything so far. But I'm going to make up for it right now. King County Metro, I heard you say how you're the envy of most of the country about what's going on with King County Metro. That doesn't apply to a lot of these size cities. I look at our traffic in our town, 40,000 plus cars coming through to avoid 405. And so that's why I'm really hopeful that all the things that we saw here, all the statistics are going to be great, and by 2024, it's going to be all green and we're not going to see red in there. So Kim, keep shaking your head because that's what we have to do, right? But for the next 7 years, we're going to be faced with a situation where people from Black Diamond, Maple Valley, Auburn, all the cities south and east who want to get to the employment centers can't get on 405 because you saw the red, it's a mess, right? They come right to our area. I've talked to Metro numerous times about you have to get people out of their cars there, not when the congestion point hits. There's land available out there for park and rides. You can put in one express bus, takes 40 cars off the road. You have to be doing that. And so far I have seen no interest on the part of King County or Metro to do that kind of thing. Mostly it's piggybacking on top of what ST3 is going to do, and that's going to be great up and down the north-south corridor. It doesn't help us on the east side. And I'm speaking for Newcastle right now, but every city on the east side has made the same complaint of people trying to get to where they can get onto the mass transit system. And even in our area where the park and rides are, there's no place to park. So you can't enter into the system. So once you're in your car, you're driving all the way. And a lot of the people that you see driving across the bridge and all that would love to be in a bus or be some other way of getting there, but there's no opportunity for them to do that. I think you got to start thinking in a wider area. Now that may not have been the financial support for say an ST3 or something, but it's the people that affect what we're dealing with every day. You got to pay attention to them, and you got to pay attention to the cities that, as I classify Newcastle, we're on the way to someplace else. And it's tough.
Thank you. Councilmember and then Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so I wanted to thank the transit community for having representatives here. And I think that is a really important point. I mean, even though we only spent a fraction of today's meeting on it, for Renton, that's a huge point. Particularly, Mr. Rogoff, I appreciate your comments. We feel the exact same way in Renton about that BRT. That is what we're getting for our Sound Transit free dollars. That connects us to the system. I have told countless people in lots and lots of forums that's it's our light rail on rubber tires. It's going to be the equivalent. It's going to link us. So the citizens of Renton are counting on that, and I'd just like to agree wholeheartedly with that point that the way it's engineered now, it's going to work. I'm very confident. I love seeing all that green in 2024 with the lane arrangement we have. Just like to make sure we keep it. So thank you.
Thanks for the comment. Yes.
I wanted to add on to what Rich Crispo said, because I remember 2 meetings back going around the table and almost every city said we need more park and ride spaces. And so actually, prior to him speaking, I had written down to ask if there was any follow-up to that conversation that we had. I guess it was the second meeting of the year. So that's one concern that I have. And then I'd like to go to slide 39, if that's possible.
They made the mistake of leaving the clicker with me. There you are.
So if I look on the right-hand side, I'm terrified, completely terrified. And the other thing that I'm curious about is I would love to see a flow chart of this section of 405 between Woodinville and Bothell and I-5 in 2 years, in 4 years, in 6 years, and right now we have no plan that's funded. So I'd just like everyone to take a moment, because to me it's probably going to look like that. And I know that we're not in control of that, but if there are legislators that are still here, that's a serious problem. I don't know what the solutions are. I appreciate all the work that Kim and his team have done. I know they're trying really hard, but I would echo what Senator Palumbo said, which is not enough and not soon enough. That's all I can really say. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Burke?
Thank you. I don't get to speak for our council very often.
Yeah, there's no microphone.
So I'm going to take advantage of it while I can. So our council's long been a supporter of the 405 master plan. We were supportive of the 2013 EAG direction to initiate the 2+3+ on 405 ETL. And we agree with Mr. Corman here, Councilmember Corman, is this is really about, and I think the data certainly shows this, really about improving highway performance for all users, as well as a revenue tool. And I think while there may be, obviously there's the legislative direction that came out in 2015, and you have to work your way through that. I think from certainly from our council's perspective, you're meeting our policy intent of the 405 ETL lanes. And during the ST3 conversations, 405 BRT was one of our highest priority ST3 projects, and using the 405 ETL lanes was the only way we saw that as really being a bus rapid transit system. So I know, Roger, your staff's coming up to our council here in a few more weeks and presenting a lot of the same information, so looking forward to that conversation and really appreciate all the information you pulled together today, and a lot of dense technical information, pretty easy way to understand it.
Great, thank you. Very much appreciated. Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what Mayor Crispo said. I mentioned this before, but for this system to work, a lot of the people that are going to be using or need to use mass transit or high capacity transit are outside the metro jurisdiction, outside the Sound Transit jurisdiction, particularly in southern Snohomish County. And again, all the cities on the east side and the southern part of the county, of King County, are getting past their traffic. So somehow we need to get people onto mass transit before they get, for example, to the 522, 405 intersection. I mean, that intersection right now is a failure. We can do all these improvements, but with more people moving further away from the city centers, somehow we have to get them onto mass transit. And maybe that needs a legislative fix, Mr. Rogoff, but somehow we have to get people onto whatever you're going to build before they get to, say, the 405, 522 intersection, at least for us, for my city.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Other, yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I just wanted to express my support for Mr. Rogoff's comments as well. The whole notion of revisiting the managed lanes is one that we should just not talk about anymore. We are committed to this plan. It's a long-standing plan. It's been in place for a long time. And the region, the voters have made a decision to make a major investment in bus rapid transit on 405. I agree with my colleague from Renton. We desperately need it. We're counting on it. And we just need to stay the course and solve the problems as they come up. And I appreciate that we need investment in the north end, and we definitely do, but we can't have a major change in direction. So I wanted to express Kirkland's support as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, questions from members of the panel? Okay, hearing none, we're going to take a few minutes for public comment. Do we have a list of people who have signed up to speak?
We do. I have it up here. I'll go ahead and call. So let's start with David Habowitz, and just a reminder, there's 3 minutes to speak. So I'm going to ask that you respect that time frame so I don't have to stand up and hover over you to take it back. Yep. Okay. And Anne's got a clock back there too.
Good morning, everyone, or right at lunchtime. My first thing is more of a rhetorical question. How many of you considered using transit to get here today? Think about that, and I appreciate that. I intended to ride bike here, but then I had a flat tire, didn't have time to change it out, so here I am in my truck. But I wanted to say that really we should be looking at leading by example and know that that's an important part of what we're trying to strive for here. I wanted first to give a few shout outs to WSDOT. Thank you for the hard shoulder running. That's made a big difference. And in particular to community transit, I love the double-decker buses. And if you've ever not ridden in them, you need to get up in that front top seat and you will love it. It's exciting. And in fact, the electric buses that are coming actually have enough power to make it up the hills and not hold up the traffic behind them, which is a big part of what's slowing down those HOV lanes, believe it or not. With that, I want to also say that you've had a great presentation, and I want to say that's the Rainbows and Cupcakes version of the presentation. And you're doing yourselves a disservice if you only give 3 minutes to the counter to the information you have and not consider more of the alternatives, which I would love the opportunity to share and discuss the ideas in more depth. Knowing that, I want to point out today, as we sit here, they are in the process of dismantling the East Side Rail Corridor. If you want to get cars off of 405, don't tear apart other opportunities. That's our only other corridor over here, and we're in the process of removing that to make it for bikes. And mind you, I'm in Cascade Bike Club, and I would still rather have that as a metro or as a transit format. The HOV lanes have been failing, but the why is the question. And I would challenge that one of the things that we've done with them is not built them to FHWA standards, which among other things include having a 4-foot buffer between them and the general purpose lanes, which increase your what they call friction between the lanes. There are many other components there. So let's talk about why they've been so successful since we've implemented the tolls. Well, one of those, it's not actually that they're charging money for the lanes, but rather the capacity add. We added 25% capacity south of here, and we added 33% capacity where we added the hard shoulder running. So those are the reasons. Also that we've added the ramps, the direct access ramps. With that, I wanted to say that the surveys you used only included people that are good to go past users. You didn't ask the people who aren't using them, and we have to look at the entire community, not just a small set. Snohomish County, meanwhile, is probably paying somewhere around 80% of the revenue to those tolls, while the folks in Kirkland, pardon me, but are getting to appreciate 75-cent tolls and 5 lanes of free-flowing traffic. We haven't talked about collisions, and I think this is a critical part. So wrapping up with that, I will say that I would love the opportunity, and you are actually compromising your integrity and the public view on the perception when you say things like, well, as long as we meet one of those standards, we're okay.
Thank you, David. All right, our next, Susan Gardner, please.
I'm a citizen of Kenmore. My husband has a business here in Bothell, so I'm kind of a Bothell activist too. I'd like to thank Mayor Crispo for feeling my pain, because he basically has expressed what the questions are that I'm going to ask here. I would like to know why the East Side and South County are being penalized by the HOT lanes. And by transit not allowing us to get where we need to go. I want to know why people who can afford to pay the Lexus lane toll are in areas that don't have to pay. The people that are forced to move out of the high rent areas, the high home price areas, are the ones that are now either going to be stuck in general purpose traffic, not moving, or, well, they don't have an option. You say that HOT lanes are an option. They're not for a lot of the people that have moved out in that area. So they're the ones that have to pay the higher toll. Why do your toll lanes penalize freight mobility? I've watched traffic, and there are a lot of three-person box trucks that are too long to be in the HOT lanes. Why are you punishing my neighborhood? I live in the on Juanita Drive, and there's tons of diverted traffic. First it was because of 520, we could feel it, and now it's because it is added to by the 405 diversion. So I'm curious as to whether your ultimate goal is to prevent social interaction on a personal basis, face-to-face basis, because you are going to force us to stay in our homes and not get on the roads where we have to sit in traffic. Maybe that is an ultimate goal for you. Right now there's a perfect opportunity to see what the added capacity that David talked about could do for traffic. So far what we've seen are models, but we could just make one HOV lane and the rest open it up to GP lanes and see what a real-time congestion looks like, keeping in mind that as we go forward there will always be more cars that want to be on the road because we're allowing people to move in without managing that growth or and accommodating it.
Thank you.
Bill Pup. You may use that microphone if you prefer. Okay.
Bill Pop, I'm a transportation consulting engineer, a member of Eastside Transportation Association, but I'm not speaking for them at this time, as since Big Bishop has arrived after I signed up. The couple things, TTI, the Texas Transportation Institute, was mentioned as the early reviewer of the data to be used for this analysis, for the HOT lane recommendations. That review, and TTI was given data from the state and came to the conclusion that express toll lanes were okay. Well, if you look into that TTI, the data they were given, the HOV lane information, number of vehicles in HOV lanes, was estimated to grow by as much as 200% between 2009 and 2014. So with that kind of a number, and others, it was anywhere from 66% to 200% in the whole corridor for the north section. So given that, as a designer of a highway, I would have to say we would need 2 express toll lanes to handle it. And that's what we got. But it turns out the HOV demand never materialized. In fact, it was flat for the whole period through 2009 through 2014. So then that leads to the modeling estimates that we saw up here of how things will work if we switch back. Carl might be right. Maybe it will look like that. But I submit that it is better and safer and wouldn't cost much money to just try it. Let's go back to the 2+ HOV with that buffer protection, which is really a big deal, and see how it works. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vic Bishop?
Thank you. My name is Vic Bishop, and I am the chair of the Eastside Transportation Association, and I'm speaking here on behalf of them. ETA's position on 405 has always been, and from the very beginning in the 1990s, and when a master plan was approved, to build the original approved I-405 master plan. The original plan did not include ETLs. The original plan included a single HOV lane with the option of changing the 2+ to 3+ is a possibility, the option of looking at ETLs, but the original plan did not include ETLs. And our second major policy, therefore, is give us our lane back. We want that second HOV ETL lane back as a GP lane. Now, we take the position that the dominant benefit that's occurred for the $350 million that was spent between Bellevue and Linwood was the capacity increase of the additional lane between Bellevue and Bothell and the additional shoulder lane, little bit of shoulder lane, $11 million to get that huge benefit between Canyon Park and I-5. That's a classic example of what capacity can do for you. There are other simple, cheap, low-cost, low-hanging fruit kinds of things available out there for each of your communities to get some capacity increases on the entire corridor. Now, I want to change subjects a little bit. The reason that we're not building 405 in the speed that master plan mentioned is that we've diverted our attention to Sound Transit. We're spending $54 billion. You understand that PSRC says after $54 billion, Sound Transit rail will carry 1/4% of the daily trips in the region. 1/4%. Listen to the sucking sound of $54 billion going to 1/4% of our daily trips, and ask yourselves, why aren't we building the capacity that this region so desperately needs? In each one of your communities on our corridor, the 405 corridor is the obvious demand corridor for the entire east side. We are the driver of the economy of the state, and we are piddling away $54 billion on 1/4% of our daily trips. Mr. Millar, you've got 98% of our daily trips because the buses runs on your system and all the local agency systems. Let's think about spending the money where 98% of the people are. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our public comment.
Great, thank you very much. Well, I'm going to wrap things up here. We're going to continue to work with all of our partners, especially our transit agency partners, on the multimodal improvements we discussed today. At our next meeting, which is targeted, it's going to be in December or January, not sure which, depending on when we go out and see what people's schedules look like. And we're going to be focusing on a couple of things. Just, where we all stand on the 40-mile system of express toll lanes in the corridor as we move forward into the legislative section, and then recommendations on funding the next round of improvements between SR 522 and I-5. You saw the presentation about the toll revenue that might be available, how we might phase that. We've been working with the communities in the corridor, but we want to kind of dive into that a little bit. I'll leave you with one anecdote. I'm getting ready for a state of transportation presentation that I'll be doing, and I was looking at this notion of adding capacity. An example down in Houston, Texas, the I-10, the Katy Freeway. In 2008, it was an 8-lane freeway, and it took 70 minutes to get from one end to the other. They spent 5 years and $2.8 billion to expand it from an 8-lane freeway to a 23-lane freeway, the widest in the world. And the day that it opened, not surprisingly, it took less time to get from one end to the other. But within 3 years of the date of the opening of the 23-lane freeway, it takes longer to get from one end to the other than it did before construction started. We need to think of different ways of doing business. This group, through the master plan that was adopted originally, through the evolution of the master plan and conversations with you guys, we're making progress. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We're addressing congestion, which is a symptom of a bigger problem that we talk about around the table at PSRC, which is a lack of housing and transportation choices for the citizens that we serve. So I appreciate your service. I appreciate your participation here today. Thank you for the team. Thank you from our transit agency partners, and we'll call it a meeting. We'll see you in a few months.